It was supposed to be a quiet Sunday morning. The city was just waking up. The sun had barely broken through the clouds hanging low over the streets of downtown. People were shuffling into cafes, stretching off the weight of the weekend, slowly finding their way back into the rhythm of life. But on one corner, just outside a popular brunch spot in the heart of the city, something else was stirring, something no one expected. She stood there, no older than 17, tall, graceful, with skin smooth like polished mahogany and hair coiled into tight, springy curls that caught the morning light. Her dress was modest, clean, and her shoes still carried a bit of shine. A school bag hung from her shoulder. She looked like any normal teenager on her way to meet a friend or maybe headed to the library. But today, her world was about to collide with the worst kind of prejudice. It started with a siren. Quick, short, sharp. A patrol car rolled up, tires, screeching just enough to make a scene. 2 officers stepped out. They weren't in a rush, but they weren't calm either. One of them, tall, balding, early 50s, had a look in his eye. The other, younger and wearing sunglasses too big for his face, followed close behind. They didn't ask if she was okay. They didn't ask if she needed help. They didn't even ask her name. Instead, they asked a question that made the sidewalk. "Go quiet. What are you doing here?" Just 3 words, but they said everything. The way they stood, the way they scanned her up and down as if she didn't belong, as if her very presence was suspicious. It didn't take much for the people nearby to understand what was really going on. And yet, no one stepped forward. Not yet. The girl blinked, taken aback. "I'm just waiting for someone," she said quietly, her voice strong but calm. "My friend's inside, but that wasn't good enough for them. Let me see some ID," the older officer barked. She hesitated. "I'm 17. I don't carry ID with me." That was all they needed to hear. "You lying to us now?" the younger one asked, already, pulling on his gloves. The tension in the air thickened like smoke. She looked around, hoping someone, anyone, would step in. But people just stared, sipping coffee and whispering behind phones. A man with a newspaper dropped it to the ground. A woman with a stroller took 2 steps back. A barista inside the cafe pressed her hand to the glass. The girl's hands shook slightly, but she didn't back down. "I haven't done anything wrong," she said. Wrong words. The officer grabbed her by the arm. "Let go of me," she cried out. That's when the laughing started. Not from her, from the cops. "Oh, we've got a feisty one here," the younger one chuckled. "She thinks she's better than us," the older cop added, shaking his head with mock disappointment. Probably one of those rich types, too good to follow orders. They were loud enough for everyone to hear, and they wanted to be heard. She tried to pull away again, her eyes wide, her voice cracking just slightly. "I want to call my dad." "Oh, sure," the younger one sneered. "Let me guess, he's a lawyer, a pastor, a senator maybe." She didn't say a word, she just looked at them. And in that moment something changed, because a black SUV pulled up to the curb, slow and deliberate. The kind of car that doesn't belong to just anyone. The back door opened. A tall man stepped out. His suit looked like it had been cut from thunderclouds, dark and sharp. His shoes clicked against the sidewalk like a ticking clock. No one knew his name at first. But his face was familiar. The cops turned around, confused, then pale because they knew exactly who he was. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. He walked straight to his daughter, placing a firm hand on her shoulder. "Are you okay?" She nodded, tears in her eyes now but still holding herself together. The older cop opened his mouth, maybe to explain, maybe to deflect. But the man didn't even look at him. He pulled out a phone, dialed 1 number. "This is Minister Lawson," he said calmly. "I need an internal affairs unit at my daughter's location immediately." And just like that, the air shifted. But this wasn't just a story about power or titles. It was about the assumptions people make, about what happens when the system sees skin before it sees a person. And while the officers stood frozen, mouths dry, suddenly aware of the cameras that had started filming, the girl reached for her father's hand, and for the first time since the whole thing began, She smiled. Not because it was over, but because now the real story was just beginning. But before we finish that, let me tell you about someone else. A boy. 17, just like her. Different city. Different morning. He was on a crowded bus headed downtown. Headphones in, staring out the window, thinking about school or maybe his part-time job at the grocery store. People got on, people got off. But then she stepped in, pregnant, tired, barely holding her balance as the driver pulled away from the curb, and without thinking twice, he stood up and offered her his seat. Simple, kind, the kind of thing people should do for each other. She sat down, catching her breath, and smiled. "Thank you, young man." He nodded and turned away, never expecting anything more. But what she handed him a few stops later would change his life forever. And when you find out who she really was, everything will make sense. But first, let's go back to that sidewalk. Because those officers weren't done yet, and neither was she. The silence on that sidewalk was heavy, the kind that crawls into your chest and settles there like a stone. Minister Lawson stood tall, his hand still resting protectively on his daughter's shoulder. She didn't speak, didn't move, just stood there with her chin slightly lifted, her eyes locked on the officers who had just mocked her like she was nothing. But now they couldn't even meet her gaze. The older officer stammered, "Sir, we didn't know who she was." "That's the problem," Minister Lawson interrupted, his voice low and controlled. "You didn't know who she was, and yet you felt confident enough to drag her, humiliate her, and treat her like a criminal. Why?" Neither of them answered. His daughter, Ava, still hadn't said a word. Her fingers were clenched tightly around the strap of her school bag, and her eyes, though glassy, were clear. She wasn't crying, not anymore. She was thinking, watching, listening, and learning. People on the sidewalk began to shift uneasily. Some stepped back inside the cafe. Others kept their phones steady, still recording. No one knew what was going to happen next. And that was the scariest part, because something about the minister's silence felt more dangerous than yelling ever could. The SUV door remained open. Inside, another man sat quietly in the passenger seat, broad-shouldered, dark-skinned, wearing a plain black suit and an earpiece. He didn't move. He didn't blink. He was there for one reason only, and the cops knew it. This wasn't a mistake they could walk away from with a warning and an awkward apology. The younger cop tried again. "We received a call about suspicious activity, sir. Someone fitting her description was reported loitering. She was standing still," Minister Lawson cut in, his voice sharper now, "with a school bag, outside a public cafe, at 9:30. "In the morning." The younger officer hesitated, then nodded slowly, looking down. "Yes, sir." "Do you do this with every young girl standing alone?" Again, no answer. Ava finally spoke. "They said I didn't belong here." That hit harder than anything else. It hung in the air, undeniable, uncomfortable, and far too familiar. The minister turned toward his daughter, placing both hands gently on her shoulders now. He looked her in the eye. "You always belong. Ava, never forget that." But deep down, she already knew the truth. This wasn't the first time something like this had happened. Not exactly like this, but enough close calls, enough strange looks, enough double takes and slow follow-arounds. In stores, she was used to the stares, used to the subtle shifts in tone when people realized who she was, but only after assuming she was someone else entirely. The officers stood awkwardly, still trying to piece together how fast their morning had crumbled. Minister Lawson turned. "To them one last time. This will be handled by internal affairs," he said. "And I expect full cooperation, no erased body cam footage, no missing reports." They both nodded, voices stuck in their throats. Then, without another word, he walked Ava back toward the SUV. She climbed in slowly, casting one last look out the window before the door shut behind her. She didn't speak during the ride. She didn't need to. Her silence spoke louder than anything else. Her father didn't press her. He knew the weight of what had happened would take time to process. But this wasn't just about today. It was about all the other days, about how even someone like her, smart, polite, well-dressed, from a powerful family, could still be made to feel like a suspect before she was seen as a person. It was about how deep the roots of judgment ran, how quick the assumptions were, and how fragile respect could be when someone saw only skin. Back on the sidewalk, the crowd began to break apart, but whispers lingered. Words like justice minister, daughter, and trouble floated between them. And in the cafe, someone finally exhaled. But the tension, that never really left. Across the city, in a neighborhood quieter and less polished, the boy who had given up his seat still had no idea his day was about to take a turn of its own. He was sitting at the back of the bus again, now with both earbuds in, watching the world pass by in a blur of brick buildings and faded murals. The pregnant woman he had helped earlier had already gotten off, but before she stepped down, she had pressed a folded note into his hand. He hadn't opened it yet, thought it was just a thank you. He figured maybe she left her number in case she wanted to repay him with lunch or a thank you call. He didn't expect anything big. Kindness, after all, didn't need applause, but that note, whatever it held, would soon drag him into something much larger than he could imagine. Back in the SUV, Ava finally looked at her father. Her voice was quiet. Would they have still left if I wasn't your daughter? Her father glanced at her, the lines around his eyes tightening. They wouldn't have even stopped, he said softly. And that's what scares me. Ava leaned her head back against the seat. She wasn't angry, not yet. Right now it was more like a slow burn in her chest, quiet, controlled, but growing. She had always known her father was important. But she had also tried to live outside his shadow, not wanting her name to open doors or protect her from the world. She wanted to earn things herself, to be seen as more than someone's daughter. But today reminded her of something brutal. The world doesn't always care who you are, not at first. Sometimes it only cares about what you look like. And now, the cameras had captured everything, her face, the officers' names, the laughter, the panic. And the story was already spreading online. But what no one knew, not yet, was that Ava wasn't going to let it slide. She wasn't just the justice minister's daughter. She was sharp, determined, and had already been accepted into one of the top pre-law programs in the country. She knew how the system worked and how it failed. She had been silent today, but that wouldn't last, because next time she'd speak, loudly, and far beyond that street corner. And as the city moved on, unaware of the chain reaction already, starting behind closed doors, a folded note sat inside the pocket of a teenage boy who was about to read a message that would tie his story to hers in ways neither of them could have ever predicted.